Secretary of State Anthony Blinken visits Beijing in the first diplomatic trip to China in over 3 years. Meanwhile, Bill Gates meets with China's authoritarian president Xi Jinping, who calls Mr. Gates, quote, an old friend. And a massive shooting takes place in Chicago during a Juneteenth celebration. This is the news that you need to know for today, Monday, June 19th, 2023. But first, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below and follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Julie R. Hartman. So let's go first to this story that our Secretary of State is visiting Beijing. As I mentioned in the introduction, this is the first diplomatic visit in quite a long time. It is actually the first time a U.S. Secretary of State has visited China since 2018 and the first member of the Biden administration to visit China since President Biden took office in 2021. Secretary of State Blinken has been there for a few days. He was meeting with his counterpart in China, Qin Gang, to talk about ways that China and the United States could forge a path forward. That is at least the way that Secretary of State Blinken is characterizing the meeting, as a way to increase cooperation and lessen division between the two countries. As you know from listening to this show, Sino-American relations have been tense as of late. We're going to get more into those specifics in a moment. But one of the principal examples of this animosity was the Chinese spy balloon that traversed over the United States in the early weeks of this year, 2023. It first went over Alaska, then it went up into Canada over the course of 3 or 4 days, came back into the United States mainland, up north in Montana, went down and across the United States until the Biden administration ordered the balloon to be shot down over the coast of South Carolina. Back in February, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was supposed to make this Beijing visit. But in lieu of this Chinese spy balloon, he actually postponed the trip until now, June, because he wanted to send a message to China that the United States would not put up with them sending a spy device into our airspace to do aerial reconnaissance of, among other things, our military bases. But as of late, President Biden has been sending some mixed messaging with regard to the severity and the intentions of China with this spy balloon. Let's listen to what he said to a reporter just a few days ago about the balloon.
On China, Mr. President, can Secretary Blinken ease tensions with China on this trip, do you think?
Sure. Well, look, China has some legitimate difficulties unrelated to the United States. And I think one of the things that balloon caused was not so much that it got shot down, but I don't think the leadership knew where it was and knew what was in it and knew what was going on. I think it was more embarrassing than it was intentional. And so I'm hoping that over the next several months, I'll be meeting with Xi again and talking about legitimate differences we have, but also how there's areas we can get along.
Well, it makes sense that President Biden would say that, right? Because we know, according to the Hunter Biden laptop story, that he and his son were getting payoffs from, among other foreign nationals, a Chinese energy tycoon, Xi Jinping. Actually, this individual gave the first son, Hunter Biden, a 3.7 carat diamond, and they had several email exchanges where they talked about 10% of some of the money being exchanged between them going to, quote, the big guy. Who do we think the big guy is? It is, of course, our president. It's so shameful what is going on here. First, our president seems to be compromised by China. And also, in that statement that he just said, that China didn't know what it was in it, and what was going on. It, meaning the spy balloon. He's essentially giving China a pass. Here we have this world power, the United States, that is not standing up to its adversaries, not proclaiming that we will protect our sovereignty and our security from encroachment. We have our leader essentially giving a pass, an okay, for their bad behavior. This is not any different from what the country of Colombia did. Colombia is a Latin American country. After the spy balloon traversed over the United States and was shot down, a second Chinese spy balloon traversed over Latin America and first went over Colombia. The president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, did not condemn the presence of this spy balloon and actually dutifully repeated the story that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, gave about the balloon, which was that it wasn't a spy device, it was just a weather balloon. And the reason why Gustavo Petro did that is that, not unlike President Biden, he is bought off by the Chinese. The Chinese have come into Colombia. They have built a railway line in the capital city. They are industrializing several of the industries in that country. And why? It's an agreement. It's a way for China to come in under the guise of helping Colombia. And maybe in some ways, certainly economically, they are helping, but there is always a cost. There's always strings attached. And the strings attached there is that China can essentially do whatever it wants. It can send a spy balloon over Colombian territory, and the Colombian president has to acquiesce to China's decisions and not condemn them because China has bought them off. That is now the situation that the United States is in. So here we have our president just a few days ago saying that, oh, this was just an embarrassing blunder by the Chinese. They didn't really know what was going on. But then a few months ago, his rhetoric was quite different during the State of the Union. This is in February of 2023. Let's listen to what our president said about the balloon then.
Make no mistake about it. As we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country, and we did.
So which one is it? If you are a top Chinese diplomat and you look at this, you hear President Biden during the State of the Union saying basically the United States is not going to put up with this. But then just a few months later, you hear, oh, the balloon wasn't as bad as we thought it was. It actually was nothing. Do you really think those individuals respect us? Sadly, I don't think so. Maybe Secretary of State Blinken will turn this around during the meeting. We don't know. We actually haven't heard very much about what has transpired so far. He is scheduled to actually meet with the president of China, Xi Jinping, today. And he says that he has three objectives for the trip. The first is to, quote, set up mechanisms for crisis management between the United States and China. The second is to, quote, advance United States and allies' interests. And number three is to, quote, speak directly about related concerns and explore areas of potential cooperation. He also has said that he would like to raise the issue of U.S. citizens being detained in China. This is what our Secretary of State calls politically motivated imprisonments. But he has said that we have to pursue friendly relations with this adversarial power. Quote, if we want to make sure, as we do, that the competition that we have with China doesn't veer into conflict, the place you start with is communicating, Blinken said. Now, with many of these mealy-mouthed proclamations of friendliness between the United States and the People's Republic of China, the PRC has been pursuing a different strategy, actually stepping up the ante with regard to anti-American rhetoric against the United States. Twice in the past month, Xi Jinping has warned the Chinese people that they must prepare for, quote, extreme scenarios pertaining to global politics. Xi Jinping has also ordered the military to be ready to conquer and invade Taiwan by 2027. This is a big source of strife between the United States and China. The United States, since back in the 1960s, has proclaimed its commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Taiwan. Additionally, China is the power that produces and manufactures the fentanyl, which is then sent to Mexican drug cartels and funneled across the United States border. Fentanyl has become the #1 cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45. Now, that's not specific anti-American rhetoric, but it's very specific anti-American actions in order to indeed kill citizens of our own country. In addition, China spies on as many as 150 million Americans through Chinese-backed companies like TikTok and WeChat. And most recently, China opened a spy base on our neighboring country of Cuba in order to spy on United States military bases in Miami and other parts of Florida. So again, we see here a very big duality. The United States is condemning encroachments by China, allowing, not condemning, encroachments by China, such as the spy balloon. Our Secretary of State Blinken has said, oh, we want to be friends with them. Let's forge a path forward. But then on the other side, they are both in their rhetoric and in their actions being very adversarial towards the United States. It seems like an uneven match. But again, we will keep you abreast of certain updates with regard to this trip from our Secretary of State to Beijing. Following his visit to China, Blinken will travel to London over the next few days, June 20th to 21st, for the Ukraine Recovery Conference, which is a conference that will encourage international support among public and private sectors to aid Ukraine in Russia's assault against them. This is another way that U.S. and China deviate from one another. China has backed Russia during this war. We, of course, have backed Ukraine. Now, there's another person who is visiting China this week that is high up in the echelons of American politics, though he is not an official member of the U.S. government, though he might as well be because his influence is so outsized. This is Bill Gates, the billionaire, tycoon, and founder of Microsoft. He actually met with Xi Jinping before Secretary of State Blinken did this past weekend. Xi Jinping said, as they were sitting together in front of reporters, quote, "You," referring to Mr. Gates, "are the first American friend I met this year." That is a bit of a backhand to our president, Joe Biden, who has met with Xi Jinping most recently at the G7 summit in Japan. But nevertheless, he characterizes Bill Gates as the, quote, "first American friend I met this year." Xi Jinping continues, "I always think the foundations of U.S. and China relations is the people. I really hope under the current circumstances we can host activities that are beneficial to both the Chinese and American people and to humanity." Let's hear how Bill Gates responded to his, quote, old friend Xi Jinping.
Very honored to have this chance to meet. And we've always had great conversations, and we'll have a lot of important topics to discuss today. I was very disappointed I couldn't come during these last 4 years. And so it's very exciting to be back.
Now, Bill Gates has been under fire for his close relations with China and specifically with Xi Jinping, given that the Chinese Communist Party, headed by that authoritarian president, inflicts many human rights abuses on its people every day. There isn't freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion in China. There's also a terrible massacre going on in the northwest region of China against the Muslim population, the Uyghurs. And so people are going, wait a minute, why is this guy, Bill Gates, essentially giving support to China amid all of these atrocities? In addition to just verbal support, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has provided a lot of financial support to China. In fact, $377 million in grants to the CCP. For what? Well, according to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, quote, "We provide financial and technical support to our Chinese partners and build bridges to international cooperation to help the Chinese accelerate product, technology, and systems innovations in health, agricultural development, and poverty reduction." Now, this sounds great, but as you know from watching the show, the way that China asserts its global influence is by using its economic capacity to buy off various countries. I mentioned this with the country of Colombia. There are so many other examples. China has facilitated deals recently between Iran and Saudi Arabia, investing heavily in both of those countries, in the oil reserves, for instance, of both of those nations. Additionally, China has gone into Hungary and met with Prime Minister Viktor Orban and agreed to build railways and industrialize airports in that country. China is also buying terminals at ports in various countries around the world, even including Israel. So they use their economic might as a way to buy influence and power so that when they do something that breaks international norms, and that is an encroachment and overreach of their power, those countries can't say anything or do anything against China. So a popular criticism of Bill and Melinda Gates is that they are just giving money to help China globally become a hegemon and ultimately eclipse the United States, which Xi Jinping and his CCP counterparts have made no mistake in communicating is their goal by the centennial of the CCP's ascent to power, that is the year 2049. Now, in other news pertaining to domestic news, there has been a terrible shooting this past weekend during a Juneteenth celebration in one of the suburbs of Chicago. So far, one person has been found dead and 22 were injured during this Juneteenth celebration in Willowbrook, Illinois. This is a suburb about 21 miles west of Chicago that occurred yesterday. People were gathering at about 6:30 p.m. to celebrate, apparently, this federal holiday, Juneteenth, which commemorates the end of slavery in the United States in 1863. And at about 12:30 in the morning, police officers got a call to respond to a fight at this party. Allegedly, when they showed up to the scene, that is the police, they heard gunshots from, quote, an unknown number of subjects in the crowd. So far, no suspects have been identified or apprehended. Judge Joe Brown, a media personality who comments a lot on politics, immediately tweeted about this event saying, quote, "This is about thuggism and a lack of character, not guns. This area, Willowbrook, Illinois, has some of the strictest gun laws in the United States. Thugs don't follow the law, but they kill the good folks who do." It is true that the state of Illinois has some of the strictest measures pertaining to guns. Illinois actually recently passed a prohibition on assault-style rifles and other types of high-caliber magazines. Additionally, Illinois has very strict background checks for those who wish to buy a handgun, and Illinois requires a permit for an individual to carry concealed weapons in public, and there is a required safety course that goes alongside this obtaining this permit. Now, others also point out that in addition to Illinois having some of the strictest gun laws, Illinois also seems to, in recent years and months, pass measures that legitimize or rather seek to decriminalize crime. A controversial law known as the SAFE-T Act, SAFE-T Act, was set to go into effect on January 1st of this year in Illinois. One of the measures of that act was actually to eliminate cash bail. So when someone is arrested, it would, under this Illinois statute, be illegal to put them in jail and hold them to bail in order for them to meet a financial incentive to go to their trial, because apparently bail is racist and it can only be paid by rich people who are arrested as opposed to poor people. Now, thankfully, the Illinois State Supreme Court placed a hold on this portion of the bill that would have eliminated cash bail for certain crimes. But there are other ways that Illinois, and specifically the area of Chicago, has sought to legitimize crime. For instance, the newly elected mayor of Chicago, Brandon Vallis, has pledged to cut the Chicago police budget by $150 million. Thank you all very much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed this part of the show, the Julie Noted News segment, and I will see you all soon. Take care.